Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I am your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is the Philosophical Equations of Economics. These books are available free for viewing online at www.philosophypublishing.com, and if you'd like to participate in the program, you can send us an email, which is published there at the website. We are also with Rick Samuelson, who's a graduate of Yale and Wharton and is a venture capitalist on the West Coast. Good to see you, Rick.
Merry Christmas.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of concepts being used in current media. And this week we're going to discuss the electioneering influence of Russia and others, and the motivation and immorality and the fake news associated with it. As we all know, in the current media, we've seen a lot of foreign influence on the U.S. election, or at least allegedly so. And so what of it? What's the big deal? Well, let's discuss it. This is a rich piece of fake news, so it's worthy of discussion. In order for us to go forward with this conversation, though, I think we need to understand what is the meaning of influence. And so I'm going to open up here the the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, and I'm going to choose 2 of the relevant meanings. First is the act or power of producing an effect without apparent exertion of force or direct exercise of command. And secondly, there's another definition that's relevant here: the power or capacity of causing an effect in indirect or intangible ways. And they give a synonym of sway. So I'm going to say that these 2 definitions of influence here are pretty comprehensive. But we're going to add just a little bit to it because I don't think it quite goes far enough. So the philosophical angle definition of influence is as follows. It is the extraneous addition of knowledge and information to an event of a decision-making entity to make its decision. So the Democrats are alleging that the election was not fair because of a foreign entity influence, and that added its information to the electorate in making its decision on who it voted for president. And further, it's alleged that this additional information and knowledge was unfairly added to the election event. Okay, first in our consideration of this problem is that we need to decide whether it is unfair that a foreign entity's influence is unfair or even illicit. In this case, it is alleged that the Russian government participated in the adding of knowledge to the election. Well, I think we could opine that should the information not have verity, or should that information be deceitful or untrue, it would be immoral or even unfair. But the standard of judging whether it is immoral or unfair really applies to not only international sources but domestic sources also. And the opposite is also true, that if the information is coming from the international source, it would be ethical and moral to decide if it to include it, to allow the U.S. voting population to know if this additional relevant, truthful information, as it would be helpful to the voting population in making their decision. But really, we really haven't come up with a decision methodology by which we can say that the international additional information is unfair. we have only come up with the criteria that states that information that is not true and has no verity is unfair or immoral. Okay. True, relevant information is always welcome as it provides goodness to the receiver. But it is an interesting question whether it is immoral or to take or steal such information, which is ultimately used for society's benefit. And information immorally taken from somebody which has benefited for another, which has benefit for another, but has consequences for that person from whom it was stolen. What should we make of this information? An example of this was in the Hillary campaign. In that campaign, a hacker entered the illicit server of Hillary that was illegally trafficking in governmental information. It is a case of an illegality against an illegal circumstance and event. But the upshot of this is that the information obtained had a great influence on the election. Absolutely no doubt about that. But for whose benefit and for whose betterment did this occur? Hillary did not benefit, but the electorate did benefit from knowing about the illegal trafficking of governmental information by the Hillary campaign. Further, from the hacking, from the illegal obtaining of this type of information, we further found out that there was collusion between the DNC, the Clinton campaign, the news media, all producing fake news. Of course, for the voting population, knowing this was certainly helpful in making their voting decisions. It's a case of the illegal bank robber after robbing a bank being held up by another criminal. Who's immoral here? It's really not so clear. So now we must decide on the essence of ethics and morality so that we can understand the opposite, which would be the unethical and the immoral, which we have here. So first, ethics is the appropriate dispensation of respect. When you show respect to your parents, you are being ethical to your parents. And nature imbues the human species with the ability to be respectful in order to cooperate. And we cooperate in order to produce things. And we produce things to better our life, to bring us up away from misery. So being ethical and moral is important in society in order to foster competition. So in the present instance, we have a bank robber coming to rob a bank of money, and a hacker coming in and robbing information from the server of Hillary. The DNC and others have been robbed. So in both instances, there is a disrespect of the target, but also in both instances, there is no agreement, and there is no will to cooperate, as we mentioned that is essential in ethics, and for the reason for all that is ethical. Although there is not an explicit contract or agreement between the bank robber and the bank, or between the hacker and the target of the hacker, we are human beings in the society of one another, and thus a minimum amount of respect is required, as we need a peaceful society in which to live, even if there are no individual contracts associated with the individual entities. There is a social contract in which the entities agree to peacefully coexist. And so society makes laws promoting cooperation between the entities, as obviously it promotes an increase in the betterment of society. In either case, the bank robber going after the money in the bank and the hacker going after the information of its target is a violation of this intra-societal cooperative agreement of existing in peace. It is also a violation of societal understanding of private property. But this is obvious. Everybody knows about the rights of private property and living in peace. But now for the interesting part in this, I think. The bank robber is robbed of his illicit gains, but the hacker is not robbed and does not try to sell his illicit information. So here, the story is no longer parallel because the hacker finds that the information and knowledge that he's stolen is actually immoral and unethical and illicit in its content. At this point, he's got two choices. He can remain a criminal and sell the information and gain by his illicit activity, or two, he can dispose of the information to bring betterment to society overall. In this case, he exonerates himself and becomes ethical again. And he becomes ethical because he tries to take the antisocial behavior that was in the knowledge and expose it to the betterment of society, thus adding to the total amount of betterment within society, making him too ethical overall. That is, he cleanses himself and becomes an ethical human being, helping society understand the illicit activity that was within the knowledge and information. And such is the case of the hackers going into the Clintons, the DNCs, and other computers. Society is better off for it. And now to the second half of the story, which involves our question of whether the Russians did it. This is a little bit like the little boy that cried that the dog ate my homework. It's also a little bit about deja vu all over again. Regarding the deja vu all over again, didn't we see the Russians and every other foreign government throughout the world trying to buy influence or buy future influence through the Clinton Foundation and through the speaking engagement fees for Bill and Hillary? And I believe this included the Russians giving, I think they give it to Bill, speaking tour fees there. But now that it's not going that way, the way that everybody thought, suddenly she and the DNC complain about the Russians trying to help Trump. Okay, this brings up a matter of motivation. Why should suddenly the Russians switch to help the then candidate Trump become president? In other words, in order to prompt people to do something, they need motivation. And their initial motivation was to help Hillary out and deposit money with her for future favors. This certainly sounds like influence peddling to me. But everybody has. But now, all suddenly, everybody has switched to the president-elect Donald Trump. Suddenly, just before the election, everybody realizes that they should be trying to influence the American voters, just taking the election away from Hillary and turning it over to Trump suddenly. Well, what's the sudden change in motivation? Where did this come from? Okay, well, we now need to study the motivational aspect of the situation, and so let's define motivation. And motivation is the comparison or ratio of the sacrifices that we make every day in our decisions compared to the rewards that we make every day, that we achieve every day, that result from our sacrifices. We sacrifice our time and our effort and our energy and our knowledge to obtain our various rewards, such as we go to work and receive a reward for our effort there. So in order for the Russians or anybody else to become motivated to try and influence the American voter, they need to be motivated and seek a reward for doing so. What could that possibly be? Well, looking at the situation, I don't see any reward for doing so. Both candidates previous to the election and after the election have remained consistent and not too dissimilar in their foreign policy anyway. I don't see anybody offering an explanation to me of the reward that would be given to the Russians in their motivation to side with electing Donald Trump. But maybe I'm wrong. Let's ask Rick and see what he's got to say about this. Rick, what about this sudden change?
Sure. The innuendo clearly is that somehow Trump is an ally of Putin and has admired him, and he certainly said a few things during the campaign, which suggests he's not as anti-Putin as others. But I mean, really, what's the downside for the Democrats in terms of fomenting these various allegations? Anything they can do to detract from Trump's image, his legitimacy, and so forth is in their interest. Is this being orchestrated by the White House? Difficult to say. I find it hard to believe the White House wasn't involved in the IRS machinations surrounding certain conservative groups. The Department of Justice is highly politicized, and now the CIA appears to be politicized under Brennan. Because I would just this morning it came out that Comey told Trump quite directly that he sees no evidence of Russian tampering in the election, and Mr. Clapper said basically the same thing. So, while politicization of the bureaucratic state is not unknown in prior administrations, it happens rather more frequently in the Obama administration than I have certainly seen before. And the press are quite happy to pitch in as well. You notice that no one is claiming, that the electoral vote was somehow tampered with by the Russians. No one is credibly claiming that. They're only claiming that the information, which they're not contesting, the leaks of Podesta's emails or the leaks of other prominent DNC members' emails are not true. They're not contesting that. And, of course, a lot of that information was very, very damaging relative to the image that the Democratic Party wants to present, particularly with whites in the Midwest. His comments, the DNC members' comments about Christians, the manipulation by the DNC of the Sanders Clinton campaign, so Clinton came out ahead. All of that stuff is not being contested by either the press or anyone else. It's just the fact that more of their dirty laundry was aired than Republican dirty laundry that is seemingly the basis for their charge that somehow the election was a miscarriage of justice and swung in the direction of Trump. And I mean, the whole thing is kind of hilarious. For them not to be contesting the damaging emails or the truth behind the damaging emails and contesting the influence on the election, of course, is just hypocrisy writ large. Will it stop? No. I think Donald Trump's presidency is going to be characterized by continued ankle biting from the left, from the media, from Democratic politicians, from the DNC, from many, many sources. And if we're speaking of quote unquote fake news, as you rightly say, this is exhibit A of fake news. But it's not going to stop because it is in the interest of the left and the Democratic machine to try to tarnish Trump as much as they can.
Okay. What do you think after January 20th when Trump becomes President Trump? Do you think it will not change this? The circumstances will not die down? The fake news will not die down? You think it's going to continue?
I don't think it will at all. I think they're going to keep digging and throwing innuendo around liberally, and they've got media ciphers like Matthews and Maddow and others at MSNBC and CNN and so forth. Politics is it's a contact sport. The sensible Democrats are already thinking about the elections in 2018, and obviously they're going to be hoping for a reaction to the sweeping dominance of the Republicans at all levels of government now. And it's not uncommon for the dominant party to lose seats locally or in Congress or elsewhere in midterm elections. I mean, it's normally what happens. So, the more they can swing those elections in favor of Democratic candidates, and particularly the Senate, right? If they could retake the Senate, the better off they are. So that's what they're going to be working toward. And smearing Trump is, part and parcel of the process.
Yeah, but won't they pay a price because in fake news, eventually the more and more people understand that it is fake news, that there is a collusion between the media and the Democratic donors and the DNC and the various Democratic operatives. So once that starts to become understood, and it will, because it's hard to keep the bully pulpit from being silent, especially with Trump. He's more vocal than past presidents. So it would seem to me that as fake news becomes understood, ratings will go down for these various networks, and I would think that after a while they would stop at least the onslaught of their fake news, which is right now coming out every day. What do you think?
Well, to the extent they had no idea that the Midwest would swing Republican, tells you the depth of their arrogance vis-a-vis, the average middle-class American, who remains, a bunch of white people by and large, right? Particularly in the Midwest, which is much less diverse.
Right.
My view is I think there has been a fundamental reset, much the way the Republicans reset the South. Remember, the South used to be Democratic, since the Civil War, because Lincoln was a Republican, and that's all changed. I think the Midwest is going the same route because the Democratic Party, as yet, does not seem to have abandoned their fundamental approach toward the electorate, which is identity-based. And the coalition they've put together is first and foremost, racially identity-based, but also sexually identity-based, and to a lesser extent, sexual orientation based. And I don't think there isn't sufficient evidence yet. That could change. I mean, you could see a Clintonian figure. I'm speaking now of Bill Clinton, not Hillary, emerge that pushes the party back toward the center. But it appears that the center of gravity of the Democratic Party is now basically in the left wing of it. The Sanders, Warren, and so forth wing, and the identity politics there are so entrenched that I think it would require, really a fundamentally new type of leader to emerge, and soon, for the Democrats to realign the party so that it becomes, something that Midwesterners would seriously consider. And
Yeah.
it may take a couple of cycles before they learn that lesson. None of these things last forever. You may find that they do badly in 2018, or don't gain sufficient seats back either at the state, local, or federal level, and someone, takes notice of that, and they get rid of the reigning DNC chairman and put somebody else in who has a different mindset, and they have a different result 2 years later. So it remains to be seen. But as things stand now, I think the left wing of the Democratic Party thinks they are right, that a mistake was made in Trump's election, that he lost the popular vote, that their task now is to undermine him, to promote their candidates in 2018, and if possible, get rid of the Electoral College.
Okay. Rick, I want to thank you for your insights, and we're going to see everybody else next week on the Philosophical Angle.
Thank you.